Each year we take a book of the Bible and we work through that book and on Sunday mornings and shed some light on it that hopefully we can all grow not only closer to God but wiser in our interpretation of His Word. And we are going through the book of Daniel this year, and we will spend 6 or 8 weeks in Daniel. Talking about God working through Daniel and in the nation of Babylon and others that were to come after that. Now, what's often most helpful for us when we're dealing with Old Testament books is try to get some perspective of time. Okay? New Testament, we're all fairly well accustomed to. We sort of know about the Romans and the early church and that time period. But we're going back 2,600 years now to the time of Daniel. And some things to keep in mind to help you focus that time. One is that the Acropolis in Athens was under construction. Okay? So we're talking about ancient Greece. The Mayan civilization was flourishing at the time of Daniel being taken into captivity into Babylon. And Aesop was writing his fables. Now, any parent has read those stories to their children, probably not even realizing they were some of his fables. It was 586 BC. Babylon captures and destroys Jerusalem and carries off the best and brightest to Babylon. Daniel was among them. This was not a new custom. When you went in and you captured a town, a city, a country, a nation, you did not want that country, nation, city, town growing strong again. So what you would often do is cause a little destruction here and there, tear down the things that were most important to them, take their riches with you, and take their best and brightest from them into your country. That's what Babylon was doing. They took the best and the brightest of Judah and Jerusalem and took them into captivity and marched them to Babylon. Now, were they going to kill them there? Were they going to subject them to abject poverty? Were they going to put them in jail? No, actually. They were smart enough to know that these people would make them stronger and smarter. Take the biggest and the brightest and put them to work. Use them. Learn from them. Take the knowledge and wisdom that they have and make your country, your nation, better. That's not a bad plan. So, Jerusalem is destroyed, the temple is destroyed, the walls are broken down, the best and the brightest are marched out. They take some people from here and there of other nations and cities that they've conquered. They march them into Jerusalem and Judah. They resettle the area with people from other places, and they leave the poorest and the most uneducated there to take care of business. Naturally, they set up their own governor and their own system, and their soldiers are there to continue the operation, often of the city. But the best and the brightest, they take away. Well, the first point of chapter 1 that we're going to be looking at today is the question, what's in a name? What's in a name? If we look at verses 6 and 7 of chapter 1 in Daniel, it says, among those who were chosen were some from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names: to Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. Now, why would you do that? Why would you give them a new name? Well, you give them a new identity, an identity that is connected to your culture and to your system and to your economy and to your religions. Well, let's look at the names. If we look at Daniel, we recognize that Daniel in Hebrew means God is my judge. Well, they changed his name to Belshazzar, which means Bel's prince. Bel was one of the Babylonian gods. So, God is my judge to the prince of an idol. In a sense, it was meant to maybe demoralize them a little bit, to show them the control that I have over you. But it was still in the recognition of religion. Hananiah, which means beloved by God in Hebrew, was changed to Shadrach, which means illuminated by the sun god. Another Babylonian deity that his name came from. Mishael, meaning who is as God, was changed to Meshach, which means who is like Venus. A heavenly star, body, planet, a god that was worshipped in ancient cultures. And then Azariah, which means the Lord is my help, was changed to Abednego, meaning servant of Nego, another Babylonian god. Now that could destroy a person, right? Possibly. Well, we go back to the question, what's in a name? And this is the first point that we can take from Daniel. As long as you know who you are in God, what other people call you is inconsequential. That's something that we can take right now and put to work in our lives. If you know who you are in God, what the world says about you is irrelevant. If you know that God loves you, whether your neighbor loves you or not is not important. Daniel, or Belshazzar, Meshach, and Abednego, and Shadrach took those new names on in the culture, not re-identifying themselves with new gods. They knew who they were. They knew that they were Daniel and Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah. They knew what their names meant. They knew who their God was. And what anybody else might have called them, or whatever, any other name they may have answered to, did not take from them who God was in their life. And we can see that play out as we move forward into the book of Daniel. We won't spoil the story ahead. So what's in a name? So many of us put so much emphasis in names and genealogies and where we came from. And there is some importance to that. It helps keep us grounded at times. I think I've probably told you all the story. I've done a little genealogical work on my father's side of our ancestry. And going back to, I think I've taken it back to maybe the early 1800s. There is a John Abel in every family, going back all the way to Germany. Bonn, Germany is where I stopped, because apparently I have to go to Germany to do the rest of the research or join some kind of online club. I don't like joining online clubs. There's a John Abel in every generation up to me. Well, I don't have a John Abel after me. You know, that hit me hard when I first discovered that. Okay, I have 3 wonderful daughters. I love them very much. I wouldn't trade them for a John. Okay. But I was intrigued by how heavily that hit me, that my name ends with me. But I come back to the teaching here in Daniel. See, it doesn't matter what the name is. What matters is the God you serve. Now, my brother, when I did this genealogy search, and I was talking to my brother, he named one of his sons Sean. which apparently is Gaelic for John. I said, it doesn't count. First of all, he's not my kid and I don't want him. Yeah, he was trying to make me feel better. No, we still got one, sort of, maybe, if you look at it sort of crooked and squint your eyes. See, but when I say, who do I belong to? I belong to God. Not to a genealogy, not to a name that's gone back 6, 7 generations, maybe farther. I belong to God. And my heavenly name, whatever that might be, is written in the book of life. And when I get to heaven, God's not going to say, oh, wow, you're the last John Abel, aren't you? And He's going to call me by the name that He has given me. And He's going to say, welcome, my good and faithful servant. That's what's important. You know, there's a lot of name calling in schools and a lot of bullying that goes on. And unfortunately, that may have impacted some of your families and children, or maybe you when you were a child. And people hurt each other with names that they call people. But if we can teach our children that it's not what other people call you, or it's not what other people say, or it's not what other people do, it's about you and God, our children will be able to navigate those difficult times. Because they will be able to turn back to heaven and say, God, I am hurt by what other people are saying, but I know that in you I belong. So what's in a name? The only name we need to know is God, Yahweh, Jehovah, Messiah, Jesus Christ, the Lord, and have our identity in Him. The second question we want to ask is, what's in a diet? If we go back to verse 5, it says, the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. That was an honor, to be assigned food from the king's table. That was to be singled out and to put above everybody else in the community. And here we had, in this portion of the story, 4 young men from Judah who are elevated simply because of their stature and their place in the Jewish society into a place of honor in Babylonian society, and they are eating at the king's table. That would be like winning an award in high school and being invited to a White House dinner. And you're going to be able to sit at the president and the first lady's table because he wants to hear about your science project. Wow! What is your mother going to say to you as you go to Washington? Use your manners. Don't eat with your hands. Keep your elbows off the table and eat whatever they put in front of you. Well, everybody expects them just to eat whatever's put in front of them. It's coming from the king. See, but Daniel resolved not to defile himself. His name had been taken. His home had been destroyed. He had been relocated to a foreign land. He says, I am not going to allow my circumstances to defile me, even if they are in a place of honor. He says in verse 8, Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. We ask ourselves what defile means. It means to pollute. Okay? It means to take something that is special, holy, set aside, and make it common. It means to take something clean and make it dirty. And Daniel said, I have lived my life honoring God and obeying His word, and I'm not going to change that now simply because somebody's taken me to a palace far away, told me I'm better than everybody else, changed my name, and said I get to eat at the king's table and the king's food. Well, Leviticus chapter 11 talks about the dietary codes and the things that you shouldn't eat and the things that you should eat, and things that were unclean and the things that were clean. So he was standing on what he knew in his heart was right for him and for his friends, and he said, please don't make us eat that. Well, the official said, well, that's not my choice. When the king gives you something, you take it. He said, I'll tell you what. Just give us 10 days. Let us eat nothing but vegetables and fruits and broths and things that grow naturally from the earth. And if after that 10 days we don't look healthier and brighter and stronger than everybody else, we'll abide by your rules and expectations. What happened? God took that act of faith and that act of obedience and strengthened those men, young men, teenagers, above all that had appeared before the king's table, above all those who ate the king's food, above all those who did simply what they were told. Number 2 point, sometimes things are worth standing up for. You know, my first point was what's in a name. As long as you know who you belong to, what you're called isn't important. And there are fights not worth fighting. Somebody calls you a name, you don't have to go punch them in the nose. You can say a prayer for them. But there are times in our lives where things are worth fighting for. And that's what Daniel was doing here. He believed that he believed, and he knew that it was his responsibility to stand for what God had called him to stand for. And with gentleness and persuasion, he simply challenged the officials, give us a chance to prove our God is real. And God did the rest. Our third question or point, it's not much of a question here. We're called to trust God when He calls you to act on faith. If we look at verses 11 to 14 in Daniel, it says, Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. Trust God. When you stand up for something that you absolutely know is right, trust that God will bring about the truth. You know, and that doesn't always happen right when we want it to, and it doesn't always happen right in the way that we hope it would. And sometimes that's where the faith comes in, because we don't see it happening before our eyes. But we've got to trust that God is at work. And that's what Daniel and Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah were doing. They were trusting God. You know, we've got people at all different life stages here. And in each of those different life stages come different challenges and different choices to make along the way. And sometimes we just have to stand up and say, God, I know this is where you're leading me. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. Everybody else is telling me something else. But I know that this is where you're leading me. Some of you seniors in high school, as you're getting ready to choose your colleges, you just know in your heart that that's where God wants you to be. And some of you are looking back saying, you know, when I started this last year, this college wasn't even in my top 10. I hadn't even ever thought of this college. If somebody said, why don't you go to something you said, yeah, right. Why? But as God began to reveal himself to you, and that began to bubble up in your heart and in your gut, so why, God? Why? See, number 3, when you stand in faith, trust God to do the work and not yourself. Just trust. Trust and obey. Walk the walk. Take the step. You know, sometimes that's so hard to do. And one of the Indiana Jones movies, the Goblet movie, I don't know which one that was, The Last Crusade. They're in Petra, and he is to go and to find the Holy Grail, the goblet that Jesus used in the Last Supper. And there's one part where he comes across, and it says, "Take the leap of faith." And there's this giant chasm, and he looks down, and there's absolutely nothing there. And his mind and his body and his gut tells him, don't do it. There's nothing there. But he puts that foot out and he steps right onto solid ground. That was an illusion. He took some sand and he threw it out and he realized there was a path there. See, God makes a path for us sometimes that we can't see. We simply need to step out in faith and walk. And for high schoolers, especially juniors and seniors, that's college. And when you get to be a sophomore in college, that's major. And when you get to be a senior in college, that's graduate school or career. And when you get into the graduate school or the career, it's to marry or not to marry. It doesn't get any easier, folks. Just ask some of these old people. You know, but you ask us old people and we say, you know, it's still the same for us. Do I take the promotion or do I not? Oh my gosh, they fired me. What am I going to do? You know, sometimes that's the hand of God saying, you know, I've been trying to get you out of this job for about 6 years, and you wouldn't leave. So I had them fire you. And you find out that that next step is better than where you were before. That's how God works. And He just wants us to walk in faith and to trust Him and to know that as long as we know who we are in God, everything will work out fine. See, God will bless you in some of the most unusual places and in some of the most unusual ways. And sometimes through some of the most unusual individuals. Some of the craziest, weirdest people I've ever met have been the people who've spoken God to me most clearly. God is not a respecter of persons as we see it. God uses people to convey His truth and to change lives. I think that's what chapter 1 of Daniel is really trying to teach us. If we look at verses 18 and 20 of chapter 1, it says, "And at the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. And the king talked with them, and he found none to equal Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and every understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. Because they were faithful and they followed God. Not because they were smarter or because they were brighter or because they were wiser, but because they were faithful. And God took from the destruction of a nation, the demolishment of a religion, the abandonment of a people, at least here in Daniel, 4 young men who through their faith in God would reshape the world and eventually the nation of Israel. I think that's what we can take with us. They found God's blessing in Babylon. They expected to find God's blessing in Jerusalem. Look for the blessings even in the most unusual places. Stay faithful to Him. Know who you are in God. And trust Him along the way. Amen. So as we go through the book of Daniel, you will find that God used Daniel particularly in ways that were unusual and uncommon. I mean, I could ask for a raise of hands. How many of you can interpret dreams? What? Nobody? How many of you had a vision last night or this morning before you came to church? All right, Casey's up one on the visions. Okay. You say, no, I turned on the television. That's not what I'm talking about. Okay. That wasn't common in Daniel's time either. But God used him because he was willing to be used. It's a challenge this morning is, are you willing to be used by God in whatever way He calls you to be used? Are you willing to take that step of faith? Thank you, Timmy. Are you willing to be a man, a woman, a teenager after God's own heart? All you need to do is say yes this morning. Yes, I want you to use me. Yes, I'll be faithful.